lost my Emily. Dickinson. It's dumb, but I like her around. Kind of a security blanket.
Oh, Emily Dickinson, huh? She's great.
Dickinson.
She's good also.
Emily Dickinson, a still volcano life. A still volcano life that flickered in the night when it was dark enough to do without a racing sight. A quiet, earthquake style, too subtle to suspect, by nature's this side Naples, the north cannot detect. The solemn, torrid symbol, the lips that never lie, whose hissing corals part and shut, and cities ooze away. I'm here today to talk about Emily Dickinson's poem, A Still Volcano Life. In this poem, she uses 3 very careful stanzas to develop the idea of the life, the personal life of the artist, being similar to natural disasters. As I hope to suggest in the next few minutes, this poem actually offers a great deal more than just this observation. But to begin, let's have a few reminders. It's been a while since we've read any Dickinson, and so it's good to just have these phrases and words in our minds again. A stanza is the patterned division of lines. In this poem, there are 3 stanzas made up of 4 lines each. This is called a quatrain. Emily Dickinson's stanzas are almost always made up of alternating tetrameters, 4 feet, ba-dum, 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 and trimeters, 3 feet, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. The rhyme is lines 2 and 4, is often a near rhyme or a slant rhyme, approximate or visual, rather than perfect. We'll be seeing this in a moment. We're going to begin with a careful discussion of each of the lines of this poem, before concluding with some general reflection. Stanza 1. A still volcano life. What do you observe about this line? Well, we open with this idea of stillness, and immediately next to that stillness is a volcano, something not usually associated with what is still. And so we have what's called an oxymoron immediately. That is, something that is 2 opposites placed in sharp juxtaposition. We also have an interruption with volcano, with those dashes. A still life is a natural idiom, right? It's one we use regularly to describe a type of painting or art where you paint something that is still, frequently flowers or fruit or anything that man has kind of created and set in place and then is drawn and represented. Still, however, is also polyvalent, as we'll talk about in a second. It can mean a still life is a life that's not moving, but it could also mean a still life is a life that still is there, a continuous effect. And so this is saying something like the fact that the volcano is always in the midst of something that might look like a still life. In this case, if Emily Dickinson, or the speaker, is talking about herself, then we might have the idea that what looks like stillness, in fact, covers up violent emotion or passionate emotion. A still volcano life that flickered in the night. Here we have this idea of the flickering of light and darkness with the night. Flicker is also a word that's usually associated with flame on a candle, and so we have potentially the image of the still life being a candle on a table. When it was dark enough to do without erasing sight. The syntax, the sense of the meaning here, is a little bit difficult and convoluted. However, I think what we can see is that this flickering light is doing so when it's dark enough to still flicker without erasing light. That is, it's not too bright, it's not too dark. It's kind of this perfect state, because erasing sight would be complete darkness or too much light. And so we have the perfect mix of light and dark, what's also sometimes called a chiaroscuro, effect. Notice the rhymes night and sight are perfect rhymes. So to review, in this stanza we have a polyvalent word being still. That is, on one hand it's a calm life, but on the other hand it's a continuous life. We have some basic figurative language, the oxymoron, which literally etymologically means sharp dull, and here we have still volcano. An advanced idea of this poem would be the metapoetic, that is, poetry about making poetry. In this case then, the still life, which is a type of painting, equals the crafting of a poem by the poet working by candlelight. Stanza 2 gives us the next nature image. A quiet earthquake style, too subtle to suspect, by nature's this side Naples, the north cannot detect. Here again we open with an oxymoron, a quiet juxtaposed to earthquake. That is, we're not usually associating earthquakes with quietness. Here, though, it's very specific that the earthquake refers to the style, and notice that capital letter, followed by the alliteration, too subtle to suspect. Emily Dickinson seems to be talking about the poetic style that she engages in. Her style seems quiet, her lifestyle also seems quiet, but underneath is a huge earthquake. This violence, this natural violence even. And this style too subtle to suspect, by nature's this side Naples. This is a very interesting use of the plural nature, right? This is not a misspelling. It's not nature apostrophe S showing possession. No, it's nature's this side of Naples can't suspect the style. So what might this mean? Well, I think the answer comes with the next line. The north cannot detect. Emily Dickinson, you'll recall, grew up and lived her whole life in the north of the United States of America. That is, New England. And so she might well be talking about her community. The people around her don't suspect the poetic style she's capable of. It's too subtle for them. We also have this image of a volcano, which I'll explain. To review in this stanza, we have easy rhyme, suspect, and detect, both of which are words about looking, right? To suspect something is to look underneath something. To detect something is to literally, etymologically, remove the roof off of something, to look down. So it's a very careful use of language. We have basic figurative language. In this case, we have alliteration. And what does the alliteration do? It acts to unify the idea of subtle to suspect to style. So it's actually, the alliteration draws attention to its subtleness and says, hey, pay attention here. At the advanced level, we have an allusion here to Mount Vesuvius, which is outside of Naples in Italy. And this is a very famous explosion that erupted, and you've probably at some point heard about the city of Pompeii. And this is what it refers to, right? This massive eruption that completely obliterated and covered up a city, a very civilized city, a place where Romans frequently vacationed and had their mansions. And we're going to look at this again in the third stanza. Stanza 3. The solemn torrid symbol, the lips that never lie, whose hissing corals part and shut, and cities ooze away. The oxymoron, here we have solemn and torrid. So you might need some vocabulary here with torrid, but it means two different things. It means hot and dry. A desert is frequently described as torrid, but it also means tumultuous and even passionate. Torrid affair is a common idiom that refers to a passionate affair, passionate sexual affair. And so this gets juxtaposed to something that is solemn. That's something that is careful, frequently associated with religious language, like a church service or a funeral, when you're supposed to be very serious. And so that's our oxymoron, this kind of serious and passionate. And we also have alliteration, solemn and symbol, that yoke together. This idea of what is the symbol? What's it talking about, right? What's the central image? The second line, The lips that never lie. Alliteration again connects these two, lips and lie. I want to focus primarily on the definition of lips as the area from which speech emerges, right, in your mouth. But lips might also be associated with the torridness of the affair, and so we have this sexual image that continues. And notice they never lie, so somehow these lips are going to be our dominant image. Whose hissing corals part and shut. A couple different ways to interpret this, right? On one hand, you can have the hissing corals, perhaps referring to the hardness of the teeth, but coral is also red, and it's opening and shutting, and so there's this image here of breath, but also language. When language is eliminated from being separate articulate speech, it gives us a hissing sound. And it culminates with cities and cities ooze away. That is, the very central idea of civilization, the city, enters the primordial ooze from which it probably once emerged. So a couple things here. We covered the vocabulary. We also have slant rhyme at this point. So you'll remember in the previous two stanzas, we had perfect rhymes. But here, lie and away don't rhyme directly, right? It's Emily Dickinson giving us this suggestion of a rhyme, this near rhyme. And in this case, I think that's very interesting that we have these two words, because at this point, with cities oozing away, the idea of patterned language and rhyme and careful construction of language is also partly breaking away. We also have at the advanced level an idea of an allusion. This one is a literary allusion. So the previous allusion to Vesuvius was a geographic historical allusion. This one is literary. And in this case, it's to Shakespeare's play, The Tempest. At this point in Act 1, which I'm going to turn to, Ariel, the kind of spirit being, is singing. Full fathom 5 thy father lies, of his bones are coral made. Those are pearls that were his eyes, nothing of him that doth fade. But doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange. Sea nymphs hourly ring his knell, ding dong, hark! I hear them, ding dong, bell. I want you to notice here that what this describes is a dead father, a dead patriarchal figure. And the reason I think we're invited to make this literary allusion is the placement of the word lies, followed by the use of coral. So if you'll look here again, the solemn torrid symbol, the lips that never lie, whose hissing corals part and shut and cities ooze away. Emily Dickinson here is mixing together a number of different images. So on the one hand, we have the allusion to Shakespeare that invites us to think about the dead patriarch, the father. But on the other, we have this idea of specifically female speech, right? You'll remember that the speaker of this poem, whether it's Emily Dickinson, it's not Emily Dickinson biographically, but Emily Dickinson, the speaker, is a woman whose lips are not lying. And somehow, by speaking this truth, cities are destroyed, right? Cities represent this kind of image of the patriarchy, of society that's run by men, a society in which women are usually supposed to be silent, right? Solemn. But actually there's this enormous inner life that Emily's articulating. There's one other way, or there's many other ways, but one that I want to suggest of thinking about lips. And that is, these are the vaginal lips. So this now just became more of a sexual interpretation, but it's this idea of female power that's represented in the other lips. And there you also have this like opening and shutting of the coral of this kind of red natural image. And confronted with this female sexual power, this torrid symbol, you have the destruction of society, which this poem suggests is not a bad thing. All right, I want to end with something that I've been trying to emphasize all semester, and that's the the importance of understanding your definite versus your indefinite articles. these two things that seem like the most basic part of human speech and often go overlooked actually introduce a level of specificity to language that you can always unpack and use to support your arguments. Notice the first two stanzas both begin with a still volcano life, a quiet earthquake style. In this case, anybody can have one of these, right? These are indefinite articles. It doesn't refer to a specific life or a specific style. But in the third stanza, you have a small anaphora, that's a repetition at the beginning of successive lines, of the definite article, the solemn torrid symbol, the lips that never lie. We have moved into a level of specificity even when the poem became least specific. Right? We just have a symbol. We don't have a specific kind of nature metaphor. So let's review. What happens in this poem, A Still Volcano Life? Emily Dickinson uses three different oxymora, which is the plural of oxymoron, from nature to describe her emotional state, right? Very simple, straightforward, just what happens. The more interesting question, though, is why? Why use these three different images? And so this is the point with which I'm not going to end because we have one kind of last thing. This gets us to the difference between what happens in the poem versus what is the poem about. And so I wanted to suggest the following. Traditional patriarchal social structures, as represented by the cities in the last line, shall be overthrown by a small, quiet woman writing poetry. That is, somebody whom society has seemed to overlook is actually the person capable of destroying that society. With that said, I want to make a connection with this poem to American Street by Ibi Zoboi. We talked quite a bit about her use of language and especially nature metaphors and the part of Fabiola. And so let's look at this one here on page 253. With that, I am red hot. I am hot red again. I am burning coals. I am a sharp dagger and Scotch bonnet peppers and rum. I am a volcano. I am a zillidanto, everything Haiti. My mother, my cousins, my aunt, the house, school, Kasim, the detective, Dre, America, comes to a boil, sizzling and popping and oozing hot, red lava. So, does this work for you? Do you like this image? Is it too much, right? Think about the way in which she's stacking on these images. Emily Dickinson also stacked on images, but I think in a more careful, controlled manner. So ultimately, here's where I want you guys to leave you and have you think about over the course of the day and tomorrow. And though there's two writing prompts, if I'd like you to pick one of them, it'd be best if you pick both, but just in a journal or in your notebook or in a Jupyter message, respond to one of the following. A creative writing prompt. Compose your own nature metaphor to describe your current situation and or emotional state. Or a critical writing prompt. Are Fabiola's nature metaphors better or worse than Dickinson's? Is it unfair to ask this kind of question? What kind of argument would you have to make to support your opinion? So I know this is going to be a new era of learning from a distance. I miss you all, and I really regret not being able to have this conversation in person, but I hope that you found this stimulating and you're able to reflect more critically and closely on what you think Emily Dickinson is doing. So thank you.